What's going on, guys? Thanks for tuning into another video. Today we're going to be tying a generic nymph pattern. I first saw this from an Instagrammer named Kure. His real name is Henrik, and when I first saw this, I gave this fly a try just because I thought it looked phenomenal, and then it ended up being such a great pattern for actually catching fish on the water. And I keep a steady 6 to 12 of these in my box now, and I thought maybe you guys would benefit from a little tutorial. I refer to it as the Dirty Harry. So a great little pattern. I think if anything, it might mimic something along the lines of a hare's ear if you're gonna compare it to anything. But again, a great pattern, and yeah, hope you give it a shot. So in the vise, I have a size 16 curved nymph hook, and for my beads I'm using a 2.8 millimeter gold, and for my thread I'm just going to be using a rusty brown 70 denier by UTC. And we can get started laying down our thread base. And I'll end my thread just by, I guess, before the barb of the hook there. We're ready for our tailing. For the tail, I'm going to be using some rooster neck in this sort of dark brown. You can see it is kind of multicolored, which is what I love about it. And what I've done here is simply grabbed a full feather off of it, and I'm actually going to be using the tip of it because of the just different color aspects. It's got some brown, some dark brown, even some black in there. So what I'll do is I'll just preen everything back, and I'm actually going to use the tip. I'm actually not going to cut it off or use it as my tie-in. I'm going to use that for my tail. And then with a couple loose wraps, it allows me to adjust it to the length I want. That looks good about there. And then I'll put some more tension on to sort of flare it out. Make sure it has the look that I want. And then I'll do some securing wraps up the shank of the hook. For the abdomen, I'm going to be using some turkey quill, and I'm just going to grab about 2 or 3 strands of it. Just going to cut off the tip there as it's a little brittle. Tie that right up against the tail. Bring my thread back up. I'm going to stop right around the 3/4 mark, but also make sure I got a nice taper on that body. And then I'll wrap this up the shank. If you find it easier using hackle pliers and the rotary function of your vise, by all means, call me old school. I feel I have more control with my fingers. Now we're ready for our wing case. So for that, I'm just using some generic deer hair that I had. I like this one simply because of the color aspects of it again. So once this is tied in, the wing case is actually going to use some of the lighter stuff. And then the legs I'm going to keep on are going to use more of the tips that have more of this barred and multicolor aspects to it. So I have some pre-stacked hair here. And then from a measurement standpoint, I don't like my legs too long, maybe no more than halfway to the body. And it's about a bead's length, or maybe a bead and a half passes where I'll start to tie it in. And I also don't want this to flare too much. So I'll do some loose wraps, try to keep everything on top. Don't let go of your left hand. Keep that nice and tight. And then once you have your looser wraps in there, to not make it flare too much, I'll go back and that's where I'll put more tension to really just secure it in. Just checking where I am. Here we go. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to work my way back up. And I'm going to start to separate my legs. I'm just going to eyeball it. And with my fingers, I'm just separating it. Then once I have the generic sort of measurement, I'll preen them back. Sort of bending those fibers back and down. And then I'll do a few wraps in front to keep them positioned there. And that's just going to help with the next part. So I'll bring my thread back to the thorax area, and I'm going to tie in some squirrel dub. And I'm going to use some of the darker stuff just to give it some contrast. And you really don't need much of it. I'm going to probably tie in a 1.5 to 2 inches of a very thin noodle. A little bit more there. And then I'm going to end again with my thread in front, right behind the bead. Going to grab my deer hair. This is probably the trickiest part of the fly. Just making sure you have everything nice and even. any fibers that you do sort of get trapped in the front, kind of like what I'm having difficulty with right now, don't sweat it too much because you can always nip those off. Now I'm just doing sort of a turn and tension, turn and then tighten. Then we can come in here and nip these off as close as possible. I think that's looking good. We're ready for a quick little whip finish. Now it's just a little bit of cleanup, right? I got a couple stray fibers from the squirrel dub sitting on top here, which I don't want. I like having that little kind of mohawk at the top there. Now we're just going to grab any UV resin that you have. I prefer the thin stuff because we only really want a thin coat on this. Then I'll come in with my bodkin and just spread it out nice and even. Make sure you get those thread wraps covered. I even find it kind of makes the rusty brown color really pop. Go. Let's hit that with the UV light. And there you have it. One of my favorite nymph patterns. I'll tie these in size 16s, 14s for some of the larger fish. And then also just different bead colors, different deer hair or elk hair will even work as well, whatever you got. But that's it. That's the Dirty Harry. Thanks for watching. Hope you tune into the next video. Cheers.